Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Vecima Networks webcast entitled Fighting Fiber with Fiber and Gaining an RDOF Advantage. Today we have Vijay Raman, Vecima Networks VP of Product Management. He's with us today. Welcome, Vijay.
All right, thanks, David, and glad to join you for this webcast this morning. So basically, I'm VP of Product Management for the Fiber Access product portfolio. But a little bit of background: I joined Vecima along with other members of the Nokia team when Vecima acquired Nokia's cable and EPON gain speed business unit in August of 2020. And these products, from the Nokia gain speed business unit you really have had remarkable success in the market since we've come over to Vecima in terms of the revenue growth, customer acquisition, and margin contribution to Vecima. So really excited, how well these products have done, and look to continue their success in the market. So let's get into this presentation. This presentation is fighting fiber with fiber and gaining the RDOF or gaining an RDOF competitive edge. So really, before going through some of those specifics, I think it's important to kind of highlight, kind of the cable MSO wish list, or essentially what's the problem statement? What's the problem statement that we think we can solve in with fiber access portfolio products here at Vecima. So really, from a cable MSO perspective, they've been dealing with a hockey stick in demand for more data capacity, and this has been driven by a couple of things. One, lots of new users, lots of new devices out on the network, high speed data requirements, this migration from QAM to IP video, and of course, over the last 18 months, COVID pandemic with so many power users now working from home and requiring a lot more bandwidth and putting a lot more stress in terms of the access network for these cable MSOs and providers. And so essentially to meet these requirements, these networks have to deliver, faster service or a degree of faster service velocity and a level of flexibility to kind of quickly accommodate kind of these changing network requirements and these customers' demands, right? So really, how do they do that, and what are some of the options to be able to go do that? So in the access network, cable MSOs essentially have coax and fiber, deployed for the most part in the access network. So the challenge, or I would call the conundrum here, is that you have coax has vast coverage, but does have some capacity limits. Fiber brings ubiquitous capacity, but it lacks some coverage and can be expensive, to deploy. Uh, so year over year, what you see, over the last 20 plus years is this kind of incremental growth in, just the the deployment of fiber. A couple of percentage points year over year. If you look at today, you see a lot of different market numbers, but in terms of the USA, 25% home passed, and incrementally, some single digit growth year over year, primarily driven by greenfield deployments. In Canada, you see market numbers like 50% homes passed. Last couple of years, a little bit more acceleration, maybe 9-10% of year over year growth in fiber deployment. But in general, basically it's been growing, but kind of growing slowly. So essentially, if you walk through what the options MSOs have to meet those capacity needs, those capacity requirements we talked about earlier, the first slide, the problem statement, they could essentially have the status quo, right, which is essentially business as usual, adding HFC capacity through various node splits, and kind of taking that approach. But the challenge is there's a boatload of additional OpEx requirements in order to do that, whether it's space, power, but just the level of complexity that requires, it tends to make that much more costlier and more difficult. Distributed access architecture is a much better approach, right, in terms of the growth in the traditional coax HFC network, where you're essentially simplifying the network by pushing certain cable specific functions to the node and virtualizing at the head end, right? So this is DAA, and it's essentially the remote PHY and remote MACPHY, solutions out there. And so you're taking fiber deep, Ethernet, 10 gig E all the way out to the node, no longer analog fiber, but digital fiber and 10 gig Ethernet support. and kind of gives you a good stepping stone to fiber to the premise as well. Or option three is, fiber to the premise or fiber to the home, whether it's EPON, GPON, point-to-point Ethernet. Ideal solution, but can be slowed at times by some of the required investment that takes. So, to summary, coax has vast coverage, but some capacity limits. Fiber brings that capacity, but it doesn't have that coverage, that ubiquitous coverage that MSOs would like. So, essentially, if you kind of look at it this way, what is a competitive edge, right? Really, that fiber to the premise essentially offers, right? So you have, really you're in a position where you do have some challenges associated with deploying new subscribers and getting training and essentially the back office integration. But that is tempered off by the numerous advantages of the benefits in terms of getting to gigabit capacities, uh, the support of EPON or 10 gig EPON and driven by CableLabs DPOE standards, right? So, the not all these PON implementations are created equal when it comes to interoperability, right? So, CableLabs in particular for MSOs has been very, very specific on the interop requirements between ONUs, which are the CPEs that are deployed with PON, as well as the OLTs, right, which are deployed in the head-end hub or cabinets, right? So that has given an advantage, we believe, for cable MSOs to go ahead and deploy DPOE PON. Another advantage or set of advantages is to continue to leverage, IP video and maintain or have the ability to get massive upstream capacity, right? Basically with 10 gig EPON, it's 10 gig in the upstream as well, right? So that's a major substantial capacity enhancement. Reduced OpEx, and as I highlighted before, the interop is a key differentiator and opportunity that gives a competitive edge to DPOE EPON centric solutions for fiber to the premise. So, we spoke earlier about, kind of this incremental single digit growth year over year with fiber to the premise that is being deployed in North America essentially. And, there have been a set of new funding from the federal government. So the federal government has, with this RDOF opportunity, and to a certain extent, the American Jobs Plan, has given a lot of additional onus or push to get this deployment of fiber to happen much more quickly in an accelerated fashion to the majority or broad parts of the United States in particular. And so $20.4 billion has been allocated for this. $9 billion has been awarded to various cable MSOs, as well as wireless internet service providers, telecom operators, et cetera, in order to leverage funding to go faster, essentially, go quicker, go uh, faster, as I mentioned, in order to get fiber deployed to the broader parts of the United States so that you don't have to have an incremental single digit growth, but you could have essentially double digit growth to get fiber to more homes and more businesses across the United States. Now the opportunity also creates competition for especially cable MSOs. Cable MSOs were awarded millions of dollars in in awards to go ahead and deploy RDOF through RDOF, deploy EPON fiber solutions. But with that comes competition, right? So in order to meet these customer demands, you're going to compete with cable MSOs will end up competing with wireless internet service providers. They'll be competing with, of course, their traditional rivals with the telcos in order to get fiber deployed in order to get more homes passed. And essentially, the goal is to get subscribers onto their networks. And so RDOF represents a great opportunity, but also competitive situation as well. And so, in that scenario, in this competitive scenario, how do MSOs gain an advantage or get these subscribers essentially onto their network? And so, really, here's where an opportunity CableLabs driven with DPOE or EPON presents that option, right? And so essentially, these PON systems will look like DOCSIS And these ONUs, which are deployed at customer premises, will be viewed as virtual cable modems. So what does that mean? So the PON OLT essentially is behaving like a CMTS and works with the ONU as a VCM. And then as a result, the CableLabs, as we mentioned earlier, has driven these interoperability uh, test environments, these scenarios where interop is a major priority. And then as a result, they kind of define these mechanisms where how in a standards-based fashion the ONU communicates with the controller, right, and provides the config informations. And so as a result, with CableLabs driving these standards, you get much better interoperability. You're not tied into one vendor for both the OLT as well as the ONU, and you have that flexibility versus you could see, or you are seeing with other PON implementations where interoperability is uh, much more challenging, right? So for cable operators, DPOE and EPON represents an advantage with interop, as well as an advantage where the PON systems look like DOCSIS, or an OLT looks like a traditional CMTS. So why does that matter, right? Well, the reason why it matters is you have a familiarity, cable MSOs have familiarity with a consistent provisioning model that they have seen and leveraged with rolling out services in traditional HFC networks or with DOCSIS. So when you roll out a service, it's more than just trenching fiber here and getting CPE or ONUs at the customer premise. There's back office provisioning, management, billing systems requirements. And by leveraging kind of the DOCSIS provisioning aspect of it, all of that comes with the deployment of fiber or EPON solutions. And as a result, you gain an advantage in faster time to service agility, and service velocity in terms of getting services out there to these customers fast enough. And with that advantage, can have an opportunity to get more homes passed, and more specifically, get more subscribers on your network if you can get those services out to those customers faster. So if you look at DPO EPON, what are some of the use cases that this technology or this PON technology allows you to support? Well, several of the use cases include, or deployment model solutions include, residential services, business services, or even mobile backhaul, right? So this ability to support all these use cases with an operational simplicity provides also savings in terms of ability to get these services out there quicker, as well as do it at a much lower cost. And most importantly, provide a lot of flexibility in terms of the performance needed, by each of these use cases, whether it's residential, business, or even mobile backhaul. So if you're looking at, we mentioned earlier about DPOE management and provisioning with virtualization with the Vecima 10 gig EPON solution structure, is let's kind of really quickly walk through, kind of what the bring up model looks like, right? So essentially the ONU is discovered, it registers with the OLT. OLT automatically does an authentication model using an X.509 certificate essentially. The OLT informs the back office OSS about ONU discovery. Once authentication is done, the OLT instantiates a VCM. The VCM essentially is using DHCP to get an IP address and the location for that config file. The config file is then brought down from the TFTP server, and the VCM essentially is translating that info from TLVs to the extended Ethernet OAM messages of DPOE, and then sends them on to the ONU, while also configuring the OLT. Once this is done, ONU begins forwarding traffic based on the config it receives. So these set of half a dozen steps may seem very familiar to cable operators because it's something very similar to the way cable modem comes up in DOCSIS with a head end or hub-based CMTS, right? And so since it has that familiarity, that commonness, it allows for much faster service bring up, and as a result, gets the MSO in a position to be able to get those earlier defined use cases, supported and deployed. So really, in addition to DPOE, some MSOs have also used essentially open APIs as well as Yang models, for provisioning, right? So you find some of this in some of these other GPON implementations, but essentially, this is more of, I would say, a medium term or a long term uh, opportunity for MSOs and essentially used as a stepping stone for future cloud native and automation architectures, right? And so we have roadmaps for containerized applications and microservices, but more of a medium and a long-term deployment model where DPOE offers that ability to quickly, with RDOF, kind of gain a competitive edge and leverage, kind of the DOCSIS backend as well. So in addition to, what we've described already, this unified cable access, represents another competitive advantage that cable MSOs can leverage or take advantage of. So really, in this scenario, you're pushing not just fiber to the premise, but also fiber deep solutions with DAA, remote PHY and remote MACPHY. So essentially with unified cable access, you have a common SDN virtual controller, common routing and switching that allows you to support any service in any medium and provides the MSO essentially maximum flexibility and benefits technically for whatever customer needs. So remote PHY, remote MACPHY, or remote OLT. And so really, if you look at our product portfolio today, we have a deployments worldwide with all these technologies, DAA solutions with R-PHY and R-MACPHY, and then DPOE solutions with 10 gig EPON. And our family of products, so to support any service, any medium, EN2100, compact RPD, EN8100, more larger scale RPD, SC1D, SC2D for remote MACPHY, and then SF4X for EPON solutions, supporting 512 users or subscribers, and with a variety or a couple of different 7360, which is our cabinet EPON solution, can get up to 16K subscribers that we could support off of that platform. So a lot of different products to support any service, any medium, DAA, remote MACPHY, remote PHY, 10 gig EPON, with worldwide deployments today, worldwide reference customers today that customers, cable MSO customers can leverage and benefit from in terms of adding these technologies into their access network. So in summary, what is the advantage, or what are some of the keys as we kind of discussed in terms of fighting and winning with fiber and fiber? Because the goal is not just to fight with fiber, but it's to win, with fiber. So essentially, we have this with 10 gig EPON and DPOA solutions. We have this ability to introduce fiber to the premise services faster and easier, and leveraging the CableLabs standards and getting those services deployed much, much faster than other PON solutions. As a result of getting those services faster, it gives a competitive edge with all the RDOF dollars that are now being invested, where the federal government is now pushing more aggressively to, instead of going single-digit growth, drive for potentially double-digit growth over the next 5+ years, so that you get more larger footprint, more ubiquitously deployed in North America. Obviously, the deployment from QAM video to all IP video services. And then finally, with unified access, you go with DAA, which is remote PHY and remote MACPHY, with fiber deeper into the access network for the cable MSOs. Plus, the EPON solution gives a competitive edge to these MSOs. So service agility, familiarity with DPOE, 10 gig EPON provides the fastest time to service. So essentially, you're deploying fiber wherever you can, and then coax with fiber deep DAA where you must. And the end game, of course, is to win, right? To win more subscribers, to get more homes passed, to give that advantage to cable MSOs. And Vecima is at the forefront of doing that and will continue to do that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, VJ. That was a lot of good information, just what I was looking for, and I'm glad you had the time to share it with us. Now, being a simple man, I like to consolidate things a little bit. So here's what I'm taking away from your presentation today in the simplest of terms. Is though you'll hear slight variations in the exact numbers. Right now, coaxial has vast coverage, 70-75%, but it has capacity limits. And then enter fiber. Fiber brings capacity, but lacks coverage and is sort of expensive, but growing. So enter RDOF, which is basically taking what industry fiber growth and accelerating it like turning normal gasoline into jet fuel. Whoosh! It's accelerating big time with government backing, bringing fiber to rural areas. And then you have fiber deployments with EPON, leveraging DOCSIS provisioning, which gives cable MSOs that competitive edge as it brings multi-gigabyte services faster to presence, which, houses, businesses, etc. And this is versus other PON technologies. And then finally, enter Vecima. We have solutions like unified cable access with R-PHY, R-MACPHY, and PON together. And Vecima adds to that services, knowledge, and experience to make sure you're installing fiber and coax in a complementary way to give customers what they need, where they need it, and allow cable operators to significantly broaden their market share where they deploy to FTTP. So a lot of great information. That's the core I took away from it, and looking forward to what RDOF and fiber brings everybody. I appreciate everyone's time today listening in. If you have any questions, you can go to our website, vecima.com, and also email to sales@vecima.com with any questions that you have. And I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thanks.